If your grandmother's kitchen smelled like percolating coffee and cigarette smoke, and her favorite dishes glowed orange under the light, welcome home. The 60s weren't just a decade, they were a feeling. A strange, comforting space-age feeling. And if you visited that home, these 30 things probably sat on her shelves, in her cupboards, or in her daily routine, until they quietly disappeared. Let's start with something that perfectly captures the wild spirit of 1960s parenting: lawn darts. These weren't cute plastic toys. They were foot-long missiles with weighted metal tips, sharp enough to pierce straight through a watermelon. Families would gather in their backyards on Sunday afternoons, and children as young as 5 would hurl these spears across the lawn, aiming for plastic rings on the ground. The sensory experience was unforgettable. The satisfying weight of the dart in your hand, the whoosh of air as it sailed overhead, the metallic clang when it struck the target ring, and that distinctive thunk when it buried itself several inches into the grass. Parents would sip their cocktails and watch as these deadly projectiles crisscrossed the yard, sometimes passing within feet of running children. Before plastic revolutionized everything, making ice was a small battle you fought every single day. Metal ice cube trays with pull-up levers dominated every freezer in America, and they were absolutely terrible at their job. The experience assaulted every sense. The shocking cold that burned your fingers when you grabbed the metal tray from the freezer, the resistance as you tried to pull the lever that supposedly released the cubes, the grinding screech of metal against metal that made your teeth hurt, and the inevitable moment when the whole tray would slip from your frozen fingers and crash onto the kitchen floor, sending ice cubes skittering under the refrigerator. These trays had a special talent for freezing stuck to the freezer shelf, requiring you to run warm water underneath until they finally released with a crack. The lever mechanism would constantly jam, and you'd end up twisting the entire tray like you were wringing out a towel, praying the cubes would pop free. Half the time, you'd get maybe 3 cubes out of 12, and the rest would remain stubbornly frozen in place. In 1960s living rooms, right next to the candy dish and TV guide, you'd find an elegant cigarette dispenser, often a beautiful wooden or brass contraption that would mechanically present a cigarette when you pressed a button. These weren't hidden away or treated as shameful. They were showpieces, conversation starters, symbols of sophistication and modern living. The ritual was almost ceremonial. The soft click of the mechanism, the smooth slide of the cigarette emerging from its slot, the snap of a matching table lighter, and the immediate bloom of smoke that would hang in the air, caught in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The smell of tobacco was so omnipresent in homes that it was simply what home smelled like, a mix of burning tobacco, upholstery, and whatever was cooking in the kitchen. These dispensers came in every style imaginable. Some were simple wooden boxes with spring-loaded mechanisms, others were elaborate musical affairs that played a tune while presenting your cigarette. The fanciest ones were integrated into coffee tables, end tables, or even wall-mounted units that held multiple packs and included built-in ashtrays and lighters. Here's something that sounds like an urban legend, but is absolutely terrifyingly real. Millions of American families in the 1960s ate their dinner off radioactive plates. Fiestaware, the colorful ceramic dishware that was wildly popular from the 1930s through the 1970s, contained uranium oxide in its glaze, specifically in the red and orange colors. This wasn't a secret or an accident. Manufacturers deliberately added uranium to achieve those brilliant, eye-catching colors that made Fiestaware so distinctive. The dishes would glow under UV light, and if you held a Geiger counter near a red Fiestaware plate, it would click away like something out of a science fiction movie. We're talking about genuine radioactivity here, the kind that emits alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. In the 1960s, your telephone wasn't something you owned. It was something you rented from the phone company, and it was physically attached to your house with wires you couldn't disconnect. These weren't the modular plug-in rotary phones some people remember from the 1970s and 80s. These were permanent installations that required a telephone company technician to install and remove. The experience of using one was entirely tactile and auditory. The resistance as you stuck your finger in the dial hole and pulled it clockwise until it hit the stop, the mechanical clicking as the dial returned to its starting position, the specific rhythm of dialing that became muscle memory, the long pull for 9, the quick tap for 1, and the satisfying weight of the handset, a solid piece of bakelite plastic that could probably survive a nuclear blast. Rehook. That's just the beginning. What's next makes lawn darts look safe and metal ice trays convenient. We're entering kitchens filled with asbestos, bathrooms with actual poison, living rooms with killer furniture. Item 12 sat next to your grandmother's dinner plates and remains dangerous today. Every 1960s household had at least one mercury thermometer, and when one inevitably broke, which happened constantly, liquid mercury would spill out, creating dozens of tiny silver balls that rolled across floors and were nearly impossible to clean up completely. And here's the shocking part. Children were fascinated by it. The sensory experience of mercury is unlike anything else. Those perfect little silver spheres rolling across a surface, the way they'd merge together when they touched, the cool, heavy weight if you were foolish enough to hold it in your hand, and the mesmerizing way it would reflect light, like a liquid mirror. It looked like something from another world, and children would sometimes play with it, rolling it around, trying to catch it, completely unaware they were handling one of the most toxic substances in the home. Parents would try to sweep it up, but mercury is nearly impossible to collect completely. Those tiny droplets would roll into cracks in the floorboards, under baseboards, into heating vents. They'd evaporate slowly, releasing toxic mercury vapor into the air that families would breathe for weeks or months afterward. Some people would even save the mercury from broken thermometers in small jars, keeping it as a curiosity or letting children play with it under supervision. Ironing in the 1960s meant spending hours every week pressing clothes, and to protect your ironing board from the intense heat, you used a special heat-resistant cover. That cover was made of asbestos, the same material that would later be recognized as one of the most dangerous substances ever used in homes. The experience seemed so safe, so domestic. Setting up your ironing board in the living room while watching television, the hiss of steam as you pressed the iron down, the clean smell of hot cotton, and the satisfaction of watching wrinkles disappear. But with every press of that hot iron, microscopic asbestos fibers were being released into the air, floating around your living room, settling on furniture, and being inhaled by everyone in the house. The covers were marketed as a safety feature. They wouldn't burn or scorch like regular fabric, and they could withstand any temperature your iron could produce. They were thick, durable, and lasted for years. Some even had asbestos padding underneath for extra heat protection. Housewives would iron for hours, breathing in those invisible fibers, while children played on the floor nearby, their developing lungs particularly vulnerable to the microscopic particles settling around them. While we're on the topic of toxic substances marketed to families, let's talk about children's art supplies. In the 1960s, most paint sets designed for kids contained lead, lots of it. These weren't specialty paints or industrial products accidentally given to children. These were products specifically manufactured and marketed for young artists. The experience of using these paint sets was pure childhood joy. prying open the metal tin with its satisfying click, seeing all those vibrant colors arranged in neat rows, squeezing out the thick paint that had a distinctive chemical smell, and the way the colors seemed so much brighter and more intense than anything available today. That was the lead. Children would spend hours painting, getting paint on their hands, sometimes even on their faces, and occasionally sucking on the brush ends while concentrating on their artwork. Parents encouraged this, of course. Art was educational, creative, wholesome. The paint sets came with pictures of smiling children on the box, often with reassurances about quality and safety. Some were even marketed as being specifically formulated for children's delicate skin. The aluminum Christmas tree was the height of 1960s space-age chic, a gleaming, futuristic alternative to traditional evergreens that looked like something from a science fiction movie. These trees were made entirely of aluminum foil strips attached to aluminum wire branches, creating a shimmering metallic spectacle that reflected light in dazzling ways. But here's the deadly problem. Aluminum conducts electricity. So you absolutely could not put electric Christmas lights directly on these trees. Doing so created a serious risk of electrocution. Instead, families would set up a separate color wheel, a rotating disc with colored lights that would shine on the tree, making it appear to change colors as the wheel turned. The effect was mesmerizing, the soft whir of the motor, the shifting colors washing over the metallic branches, the way every surface seemed to glow and shimmer. Clackers were one of the most popular toys of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and they were essentially weapons disguised as playthings. The toy consisted of two large acrylic balls attached to either end of a string with a ring in the middle. You'd hold the ring and swing the balls up and down, making them clack together above and below your hand with increasing speed and force. The sensory experience was addictive. The rhythmic clacking sound that would echo through the neighborhood, the vibration traveling up the string into your hand, the challenge of getting them moving faster and faster, and the satisfaction when you achieved a perfect rhythm. Kids would compete to see who could clack the longest or the fastest, and the sound of dozens of children playing with clackers simultaneously was a distinctive soundtrack of the era. Re-hook, 10 items deep, radioactive dinnerware, toxic toys, electrocution-ready decorations. What's next is worse. Nurseries with glass bottles that shattered in babies' mouths, medicine cabinets full of poison. Item 17 was in every bathroom, and bare hand contact caused permanent damage. Before plastic became ubiquitous, every baby in America drank from glass bottles, heavy, fragile glass bottles that parents would heat on the stove or in boiling water, then test against their wrist before feeding. The potential for disaster was constant and multifaceted. The daily experience was fraught with anxiety. The weight of the glass bottle in your hand, the fear of dropping it while holding a squirming infant, the terror of the glass cracking from sudden temperature changes, and the heart-stopping moment when a bottle would slip from exhausted hands at 3 a.m. and shatter across the kitchen floor. The sound of breaking glass in the middle of the night, followed by a screaming baby, was a rite of passage for 1960s parents. But the dangers went beyond simple breakage. Glass bottles could crack from thermal shock, going from refrigerator cold to boiling water too quickly. And these cracks weren't always visible. A bottle might look fine, but have microscopic fractures that would suddenly give way during feeding, potentially cutting the baby's mouth or face. The nipples were rubber and would degrade over time, developing cracks where bacteria could hide, and they needed to be boiled regularly to sterilize them. Modern pressure cookers have multiple safety features: pressure release valves, locking lids, backup vents, and automatic shutoffs. The pressure cookers of the 1960s had none of these. They were essentially bombs that you put on your stovetop and hoped for the best. The experience of using one was genuinely terrifying once you understood what could go wrong: the heavy sealed pot sitting on the burner, the hissing of steam as pressure built, the rocking of the weight on top as it released tiny bursts of steam, and the constant awareness that you were standing next to a vessel containing superheated liquid under extreme pressure. The smell of whatever was cooking would fill the kitchen, mixed with the metallic scent of steam and the underlying anxiety that permeated the whole process. Not technically a household item, metal playground equipment was in nearly every backyard in the 1960s, and it represents a fascinating snapshot of how differently we thought about child safety. These weren't the powder-coated, rounded-edge, carefully designed structures of today. These were angular metal contraptions that got blazingly hot in summer, freezing cold in winter, and were anchored in concrete or packed dirt, with no safety surfacing whatsoever. The sensory experiences were extreme and memorable. The searing pain of touching a metal slide that had been baking in the summer sun, hot enough to cause actual burns through shorts or thin clothing. The metallic smell of rust and old paint. The jarring impact of jumping or falling onto hard-packed dirt or concrete. The sharp edges where paint had chipped away, leaving rust that would stain your clothes and sometimes break your skin. The eerie creaking of swing sets that were never quite stable, rocking back and forth with each swing, their legs actually lifting out of the ground at peak momentum. In the 1960s, real fur coats were status symbols that middle-class families aspired to own, and maintaining them required storing them with mothballs, small white balls of pure pesticide that released toxic vapor to keep moths from eating the fur. Every closet that contained fur had that distinctive, overwhelming smell that would permeate not just the closet, but entire rooms and even the clothes of people who wore the furs. The sensory assault was immediate and unmistakable, opening a closet door and being hit with a wall of mothball smell so strong it would make your eyes water. The chemical odor would cling to everything: your clothes, your hair, your skin. If you wore a fur coat that had been stored with mothballs, you'd carry that smell with you wherever you went, a toxic cloud that announced your presence before you entered a room. This might be the most shocking item on our entire list. In the 1950s and early 1960s, you could buy your child a chemistry set that included actual radioactive uranium ore samples. The Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab, sold from 1950 to 1951, came with 4 types of uranium ore, a Geiger counter, a cloud chamber, and a manual that taught children how to conduct nuclear experiments in their bedrooms. Even after the U-238 lab was discontinued, chemistry sets throughout the 1960s contained substances that would be unthinkable today: concentrated acids, explosive chemicals, toxic heavy metals, and compounds that could cause serious burns or poisoning. These weren't watered-down educational versions. These were real, dangerous chemicals that children were expected to handle with minimal supervision. Rehook 15 down, and the pattern is clear. 1960s homes were minefields families navigated without thinking, but darker territory awaits. Items so dangerous they're still illegal to possess today. Item 23 was in nearly every garage in America, and it's so toxic that cleanup requires a hazmat team. Before modern safety standards, space heaters were essentially portable fire hazards that people would leave running unattended, sometimes overnight, often placed dangerously close to curtains, furniture, or bedding. These devices had no automatic shut-off if they tipped over, no overheat protection, and no safety guards to prevent items from falling directly onto the heating elements. The sensory experience was deceptively cozy: the orange glow of the heating coils, The dry heat radiating outward, the slight smell of dust burning off the elements, and the comforting warmth in a cold room. But that comfort came with constant danger. The heaters would get hot enough to ignite anything that touched them: paper, fabric, wood, even carpeting if the heater was placed directly on it. Here's something that perfectly encapsulates 1960s attitudes toward chemicals. You could buy a can of DDT, a pesticide so toxic it was later banned worldwide, and spray it throughout your home, covering your furniture, dishes, and children's toys with a poison that would persist for years. DDT was marketed as a miracle chemical that would eliminate all household pests, and people used it liberally. The experience seemed so modern, so scientific, pressing the button on the fogger and watching a fine mist fill the room, settling on every surface like a chemical snow. Or automatic drip coffee makers. Many families used glass percolators placed directly on stovetop burners. A combination of fragile glass, open flame, or electric heat, and boiling liquid that led to frequent disasters. These weren't the electric percolators that came later. These were thin glass vessels that you'd place directly on a burner and hope they wouldn't crack or shatter. The morning ritual was both comforting and nerve-wracking, filling the percolator with cold water, adding the coffee grounds to the basket, placing it on the burner, and watching as the water heated and began to percolate. The sound was distinctive, a rhythmic bubbling and gurgling as the boiling water was forced up through the tube and over the coffee grounds. The smell of fresh coffee would fill the kitchen, mixing with the anxiety of knowing that at any moment the glass could crack and send boiling coffee and broken glass across your stovetop. Thermal shock was the main culprit. If you put cold water in the percolator and placed it on a hot burner, the sudden temperature change could cause it to crack immediately. If you removed it from the heat and set it on a cold counter, same result. Even just using it repeatedly would eventually cause stress fractures that would suddenly give way, often while the percolator was full of boiling coffee. When they broke, the results were dramatic and dangerous. Boiling coffee spraying across the stovetop and onto whoever was standing nearby, broken glass mixing with the coffee, creating a scalding, sharp mess that was difficult to clean up safely. Burns from splashing coffee were common, as were cuts from trying to clean up the broken glass. Yet people used these every single day, multiple times a day, because coffee was essential and this was the technology available. The shift to electric percolators and then automatic drip coffee makers wasn't just about convenience. It was a significant improvement in kitchen safety. Or inline skates and modern roller skates with proper boots, children wore metal skates that clamped onto their regular shoes with a skate key. These contraptions were uncomfortable, unstable, and prone to sudden catastrophic failure that would send children crashing to the pavement. The experience was uniquely frustrating and painful. Sitting on the curb and adjusting the skates with your skate key, trying to get them tight enough that they wouldn't fall off, but not so tight that they'd cut off circulation to your feet. The metal clamps would bite into your shoes, sometimes tearing the leather or canvas. The wheels were hard metal or early plastic that transmitted every bump and crack in the sidewalk directly to your feet, creating a jarring, rattling ride that left your feet numb after even short skating sessions. But the real danger came from the clamps failing. With no warning, one skate would suddenly release from your shoe, sending you tumbling forward onto concrete with no time to catch yourself. Road rash, broken bones, and dental injuries were common. The skates would also come apart. Wheels would fall off, straps would break, and the toe clips would bend or snap, all while you were moving at speed. The skates had no brakes, so stopping meant dragging your free foot, running into grass, or grabbing onto something, none of which were reliable or safe methods. Going downhill was terrifying because you had no way to control your speed except to fall down intentionally or crash into something. The television sets of the 1960s were massive pieces of furniture that contained high-voltage components, emitted radiation, and had exposed picture tubes that could implode if broken, sending glass shards flying across the room. These weren't the flat screens we're used to today. These were cathode ray tubes that operated at voltages high enough to kill, and they sat in living rooms where children would play just feet away. The experience of watching television in the 1960s involved several sensory elements that modern viewers never experience. The ozone smell that would develop after the TV had been on for a while, produced by the high voltage inside. The static electricity that would make your hair stand up if you got close to the screen. The heat radiating from the back of the set, which would get hot enough to burn skin if you touched it. The slight hum of the high-voltage transformer operating at frequencies you could barely hear but could definitely feel. Children would sit inches from the screen, their faces bathed in radiation that we now know can cause eye damage. Parents would warn them to sit back, but the warnings were about eyesight, not radiation. The radiation risk wasn't widely understood or acknowledged. The picture tubes emitted X-rays, particularly from older or poorly maintained sets, and there was no shielding or safety standards to limit exposure. If a picture tube broke or imploded, it would create a vacuum implosion that would send glass fragments flying outward with enough force to embed in walls or cause serious injuries. Repair technicians would sometimes be killed by residual charge in picture tubes that hadn't been properly discharged. The tube could hold a lethal charge even after the TV had been unplugged for days. Yet these were the centerpieces of family life, the gathering point for entertainment, and no one questioned having these dangerous devices running for hours every day in rooms where children played. Electric blankets in the 1960s were essentially heating elements sewn into fabric with minimal insulation and no safety features. The wiring would fray, short out, and occasionally catch fire, all while people were sleeping under them. These weren't the carefully engineered electric blankets of today with multiple safety features. These were bare-bones devices that heated up and hoped for the best. The sensory experience was initially comforting. Climbing into a pre-warmed bed on a cold winter night, the gentle heat radiating through the blanket, the satisfaction of being warm without piling on heavy quilts. But that comfort came with serious risk. The blankets would develop hotspots where wiring had bunched or degraded, creating areas that could burn skin. The controls would fail, causing the blanket to overheat continuously, and the wiring itself would break down over time, creating short circuits. House fires caused by electric blankets were disturbingly common. The blankets would overheat during the night, igniting the fabric or bedding around them. People would wake up to smoke or flames, sometimes with severe burns from the overheated blanket stuck to their skin. The frayed wiring could also cause electric shocks, particularly if any liquid spilled on the blanket or if someone with damp skin touched the controls. Electric blankets were eventually redesigned with better insulation, automatic shutoffs, and more flexible wiring, but the 1960s versions were genuine fire hazards. Today, fire safety experts recommend replacing any electric blanket more than 10 years old. But in the 1960s, people would use the same blanket for decades. Baby walkers in the 1960s were circular frames on wheels that held babies upright so they could walk before they were developmentally ready. These devices had no brakes, no safety stops, and no way to prevent babies from rolling into dangerous situations at surprising speeds. They were marketed as developmental tools, but were actually injury machines. The experience for parents seemed positive, placing your baby in the walker and watching them scoot around the house, seemingly learning to walk. The baby would push off with their feet, and the wheels would send them gliding across the floor. Parents could set the baby in the walker and have their hands free for a few minutes, which was appealing in an era before modern baby-proofing. But the dangers were severe and constant. Babies in walkers could reach speeds of up to 3 feet per second, fast enough to roll downstairs before anyone could react. In the 1960s, most gasoline contained lead additives to improve engine performance, and you could buy concentrated tetraethyl lead at any auto parts store to add to your gas tank. People would store these incredibly toxic chemicals in their garages, often in poorly sealed containers, right next to where children played and families stored food. This was one of the most dangerous substances ever sold for home use. Tetraethyl lead is a neurotoxin so potent that even brief exposure can cause permanent brain damage. The liquid is absorbed through skin. The vapors are toxic to breathe, and if ingested, even small amounts can be fatal. Yet it was sold with minimal warnings, and people handled it casually. Unvented gas heaters were common in the 1960s, particularly in older homes and rental properties. These heaters burned natural gas or propane inside living spaces with no chimney or vent to carry away combustion byproducts. They produced heat efficiently, but they also produced carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and water vapor that accumulated in closed rooms. The experience of using an unvented gas heater was initially pleasant. The instant heat when you lit the burner, the blue flames dancing behind the ceramic elements, the warmth spreading through a cold room. But the danger built silently and invisibly. As the heater ran, oxygen levels in the room would drop while carbon monoxide levels rose. The air would become stuffy and humid from the water vapor produced by combustion. Baby cribs in the 1960s had no standardized safety requirements, and many had slat spacing wide enough for a baby's body to slip through while their head remained trapped. This design flaw led to numerous strangulation deaths and near misses that went largely unreported until consumer safety advocates began documenting the problem. The cribs looked innocent enough. Wooden slats, drop-side rails for easy access, decorative posts on the corners. Parents would assemble them according to vague instructions and assume they were safe because they were sold specifically for babies. But the spacing between slats could be 4, 5, or even 6 inches, wide enough for a baby to squeeze their body through while their head remained trapped on the other side. The sensory details of these cribs were deceptively reassuring. The solid feel of real wood, the smooth finish of the paint or varnish, the satisfying click of the drop-side mechanism. Rehook, we're in the home stretch. Just 5 items left that defined 1960s danger. These represent the peak of hazardous design, products so obviously deadly that even the era's permissive safety standards had to act. The final item destroyed its own company. Mobile homes in the 1960s were constructed with materials that off-gassed formaldehyde at dangerous levels. The particle board, paneling, insulation, and adhesives used in construction all contained formaldehyde-based resins that would release toxic vapors for years after installation. Families would move into these homes and immediately begin experiencing health problems, burning eyes, respiratory irritation, nosebleeds, and persistent headaches. But they rarely connected the symptoms to their homes. The experience of living in a formaldehyde-soaked mobile home was distinctive and unpleasant, a persistent chemical smell that never quite went away, a sensation of stuffiness even with windows open. The slip and slide was introduced in 1961 and became an instant summer sensation. The concept was simple. A long sheet of plastic with water running over it, creating a slippery surface you could slide across. But here's what the marketing didn't emphasize. The slip and slide was designed for use on soft, level grass. Many families set them up on whatever flat surface was available, including concrete, asphalt, and hard-packed dirt. The experience seemed like pure summer fun, running full speed toward the plastic sheet, diving onto it, and sliding across the slippery surface with water spraying everywhere. The sensation of speed, the cooling water, the laughter of other kids, it felt like the perfect outdoor activity. While thalidomide was primarily a late 1950s, early 1960s issue, its effects were still being discovered and dealt with throughout the 1960s. This wonder drug was prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness and as a sleeping aid, and it caused one of the worst pharmaceutical disasters in history. Thousands of babies were born with severe limb malformations and other birth defects because their mothers took thalidomide during pregnancy. The drug seemed safe based on initial testing. It didn't cause obvious side effects in adults, and it was effective at reducing nausea and promoting sleep. Doctors prescribed it freely, often to pregnant women who were struggling with morning sickness. The pills were small, easy to swallow, and seemed to work as advertised. There was no warning label about pregnancy, no indication that anything could go wrong, but thalidomide interfered with fetal development in catastrophic ways. We discussed metal playground equipment earlier, but metal jungle gyms deserve special mention because they were specifically designed to be climbed to dangerous heights, often 12 to 15 feet off the ground, with nothing but concrete or hard-packed dirt underneath. These structures were essentially invitations to serious injury, placed in every schoolyard and many backyards across America. The sensory experience of climbing a jungle gym was thrilling and terrifying. The cold metal bars in your hands, sometimes hot enough to burn in summer or cold enough to stick to your skin in winter. The metallic smell mixed with rust. The slight give and sway of the structure as multiple children climbed on it. The view from the top, looking down at the concrete below, knowing that one slip would mean a serious fall. Let's end with a toy that millions of children used and loved, but which was genuinely dangerous in its original 1960s design. The Easy Bake Oven used a 100-watt incandescent light bulb as its heat source, and while that sounds safe compared to a real oven, the design had serious flaws that led to burns and, in some cases, trapped fingers. The original Easy Bake Oven had an opening in the front where you'd insert the baking pan, and this opening was large enough for small hands and fingers to fit through. The light bulb inside would heat the oven to temperatures around 350 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to bake tiny cakes, but also hot enough to cause serious burns. Children would reach into the oven to check on their food or try to retrieve a pan that had gotten stuck, and they'd burn their hands and fingers on the heating element or the hot metal surfaces inside.